On the 6th of December 2024, the Supreme Court of Queensland in Australia dismissed significant portions of a legal case instituted by Adani Mining against environmental activist Benjamin Pennings. Judge Susan Brown labelled some of the company's claims as confused and embarrassing. The 52-year-old activist received this favourable judgment after nearly 4.5 years of a legal battle.
Believe it or not, it's about 4.5 years now since Adani started following my wife and kids around, following myself around, obviously doing all the things that they did. They applied to raid our house twice with little kids. What's happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone, and that's part of it as well. So we're hoping for a really good result today, to have some legal precedent which will protect all Australians from very angry bullying corporations.
Why were detectives following Pennings' wife and children? They were evidently engaged at the behest of a company in a conglomerate headed by Gautam Adani, one of India's and one of the world's richest men. Gautam Adani is close to India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Big win for coal mining jobs and people who've had enough of the senseless activism today. Benjamin Pennings, an environmental activist, will now be forced to cease his public attacks on Adani after a Supreme Court decision to grant an injunction.
On the 11th of September 2020, the Supreme Court of Queensland in Brisbane granted an injunction to stop Pennings from using confidential material and ordered he take down social media posts and stop campaigning against the coal mine being set up in the Galilee Basin. The project was once described as the world's biggest greenfield coal mine, together with a railroad and a seaport at Abbott Point. There were protests by environmental activists, including people like Pennings, as well as groups representing the Wangan and Jagalingu Aboriginals.
Adani is just the leaseholder, so Adani has no right whatsoever to have us removed. Our advice from our senior counsel is that we can go back on there, and if Adani intends to interrupt that process by trying to have us removed or trespassed, and if he tries to use the police powers to conduct this activity, we will hold the police accountable, we will hold Adani accountable, we'll bring him under charges of assault, we'll seek a redress through the Anti-Discrimination Commission, and we'll have him brought up on charges of racial discrimination. The reason why we fight against this Carmichael mine is that it will devastate our dreaming. Where the Dumbabulla Springs are, these are natural waterways that have been operating for millions of years. It gives life to our totems and the trees and the animals that live there. The whole ecosystem depends on that water.
It was argued that the mine, the railroad, and the port would damage the fragile ecology of the Great Barrier Reef, a World Heritage Site. Global financial institutions withdrew from the mining project that had to be scaled down to less than a quarter of what had been originally envisaged. India's biggest public sector bank, the State Bank of India too, had planned an investment of $1 billion in the project, but that did not materialize. On the 21st of September 2020, 10 days after the Supreme Court of Queensland granted an injunction to Pennings, he told me how Adani secretly sought to raid his Brisbane home unannounced.
The move by Adani in the Supreme Court to raid my home over 2 days is very, very unusual. So I've never heard of it before, and there was a lot of surprise in the Australian media. But yeah, there has been numerous articles in Australia about a leaked legal strategy of Adani called the attack dog legal strategy. So Adani are unashamedly quite aggressive with their legal strategy, and they felt it was prudent to raid my home for a couple of days. I've got school-aged children at home. I have a child with a disability who would be extraordinarily upset by that and affected by that. And the court, which was held without me being there, I had no idea this court case was going on. It was done in secret. The court decided that yes, Adani raiding my home for 2 days was an extraordinary measure, and having children here, and so the court said no to Adani. Adani added more information, and then they appealed, and the appeal court also said no.
Pennings grew up in the working class suburbs of Adelaide and Sydney and now lives with his family in Brisbane. He actively participated in campaigns to stop the coal mine from coming up.
This wide range of groups, which is called the Stop Adani movement, has had considerable success. So, for example, there's no bank in the world decided to provide Adani with the funds to build the mines. So the Adani group themselves, put the finances in. There's been, a wide-ranging campaign by a number of groups with regards to engineering contractors or insurers, etc. And Adani, unfortunately, have picked me out personally. So I am one of hundreds of thousands of people who have campaigned on this, but they've picked me out personally with regards to this. I do believe that they want to have a long and painful, drawn-out court process. And, I believe that Adani thinks, this will be a very public court case and high profile. And I imagine that Adani thinks if other citizens in Australia see this, they might be more reluctant to talk up or to protest, or whatever they think the appropriate thing to do is personally with regards to what ultimately is an unnecessary and destructive mine. So I have to say that I'm very proud to be part of the Stop Adani movement. At the moment, there is a temporary injunction that I can't say and do certain things. I have offered to Adani that injunction would be permanent, and Adani have thus far rejected that. So, as I mentioned, I think Adani are very keen to, make an example of me, and they are happy for, myself and my family to suffer in the meantime. I believe they very much want a high-profile case to discourage others to campaign. Adrian is a spokesperson of the traditional owners, and I can't speak for the traditional owners apart from saying that it's a little bit different. Adani did bankrupt Adrian Barragubba, and that was a very, nasty thing to do, in my opinion. So they didn't sue Adrian. It was, they bankrupted Adrian over court costs with regards to ongoing legal battles. So Adani had the choice, not to bankrupt him, but they chose the very aggressive and nasty option to bankrupt. Adrian is still standing strong, and other people of the traditional owners of Valley Basin are doing the same, and all power to them. So yes, I'm not the first person, and I may not be the last person.
The campaigners were not entirely successful. The project received the support of politicians cutting across party lines because they argued that many jobs would be created. The first consignment of coal was shipped from the Abbott Point port to India in December 2021.
Politicians cutting across party lines, perhaps with the exception of people or the politicians who belong to the Greens party with which you are affiliated, they seem to support Adani, or at least a certain section seem to support Adani, because Adani and its contractors say they're going to create jobs. There's a recession in Queensland, just as there's a recession in various parts of the world after COVID, and jobs are hard to come by. Unemployment is on the rise. So would you go along if I claim or I contend that Adani does have a substantial amount of support from sections of the political class in Australia in general and Queensland in particular?
Adani does have support by the two biggest political parties. That has changed over time, particularly with the more left-leaning Labor Party. Adani also gives money to both of those parties. So both those parties have accepted political donations from Adani. They have cash for access meetings, and the resources industry in Queensland in particular is very powerful. The latest polling numbers is it's about 65% of Australians don't want the coal mine, Adani's coal mine, and it's about 65% of Australians and about 60% of Queenslanders don't want the mine. But despite what a majority of people want, you're right, as in the political parties are supporting it, and jobs are always an issue and they're always a concern. And of course there is short-term thinking and long-term thinking, and the political parties in Australia, the mainstream political parties, are very good at thinking short-term. One of the biggest industry in Queensland is tourism, and the Great Barrier Reef is a very big part of that. So yeah, it provides about 70,000 jobs in Queensland, which is a large amount. And of course, that's under threat with COVID, but it's also under threat with regards to the Great Barrier Reef and the effect of climate change on that and other impacts. Yeah, it was a colonised country 230 or so years ago by the British. It was invaded very violently. And yeah, there was thousands upon thousands of what we call traditional people or Aboriginal people, throughout the landmass of Australia. Many of those groups have become extinct, through to violence and disease. There are, many traditional owners, that, survive and thrive, and there's a lot of, Aboriginal people in Australia and keeping the culture going. It's differently to New Zealand or Canada, for example. There's never been a treaty in Australia. So there's never been any agreement between the invading government and the traditional owners. And yeah, most Aboriginal people believe there should be a treaty. And there's never been a situation in Australia where traditional owners have said, hey, take our land. It's always been taken by force. So I think it's important for people to recognise, whose land they work and live on. But it's also really important that traditional owners whose land is often sacrificed for resource projects and is destroyed for resource projects, and their land is very central to their religious and spiritual beliefs, that's really important as well. So, from my knowledge, Adani has a very poor history dealing with traditional owners and village groups or whatever it may be in different parts of India. So the native title law here in Australia is very much set up to divide and conquer, and Adani have been quite successful trying to divide the traditional owner groups. But as we mentioned, there is the Wangan Janglingu people who have lived and protected the land where the mine is meant to be for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years before white people ever arrived in Australia. They're still fighting. Adrian Barragaba, his son Cody, and many others. But it's not only about the impact in Australia. There's also obviously impact in Australia and Bangladesh. So at the moment, ultimately, the plan with the Adani Group is for what will be quite expensive thermal coal to be burnt in India at the power plants there, and end up being very expensive electricity going to Bangladesh. So yeah, there's human rights and concerns around poverty as well in India and Bangladesh, as well as the environmental and concerns in Australia.
What is the Carmichael Mines connection with Bangladesh? The coal moves from Australia to the Adani managed Dhamra port in Orissa in India's east coast for nearly 9,000 kilometers, from where it travels 600 kilometers by a railway line to Godda in Jharkhand. The Adani-owned power plant in Godda exports electricity to Bangladesh, located around 100 kilometers away. The Godda project is unique in the world. It is located in the economically backward state of Jharkhand in eastern India, which, ironically, has India's biggest deposits of coal. Yet, coal is imported to Godda all the way from Australia. The power plant uses water from the river Ganga. There were many protests from local residents about the way in which land was acquired. Many rules were changed to help establish the project. In June 2015, Narendra Modi visited Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, for the first time after he became Prime Minister of India. The government of Bangladesh was then led by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. The power export deal became controversial because of high prices of electricity that had to be paid for in American dollars. Many in Bangladesh argued that the deal was heavily skewed in favor of Adani. On the 6th of August 2024, there was a regime change in Bangladesh. Following months of unrest, Sheikh Hasina flew to India, where she is understood to be staying in exile. A week later, the Indian government changed its rules to allow Adani's Godda project to sell electricity within India. A few months later, in Brisbane, Australia, Ben Pennings' 4.5-year-long legal battle was reaching a conclusion. In 2023, Adani dropped the part of its claim that Pennings had unlawfully accessed secret information. In her 63-page judgment, Judge Susan Brown threw out allegations that Pennings had caused 2 contractors to withdraw from the Carmichael coal mining project. She called these allegations embarrassing and inconsistent.
It was very relieving for myself and my family and my supporters, because it's, we want the whole case to be thrown out of court, and the whole case hasn't been thrown out of court yet, but a large percentage of the allegations, have been struck out, as you mentioned. And that's, it's quite a relief, but it's not completely over. We don't know whether Adani will appeal or not. We don't know whether they will try to somehow reformulate a case against me. But, the judge was very clear in her language, and the judge has also made it very hard for Adani to replead. So to actually replead and have new allegations or, varying allegations. And the last time the judge, made their solicitors provide an affidavit about the chance of winning an allegation, they withdrew the allegation. So, Adani, may drop all the allegations. They might do it today. They might do it tomorrow. They may do it in a couple of weeks. It's not a fair fight. But I'm really glad that, despite it going for so long, and despite the extraordinary tactics of Adani, which, probably more used to in India than we are in Australia. They've gone a bit above and beyond the way they've treated me and my family. So we're confident that justice will win, but we also, know that justice may take a long time. Adani alleges that I did, various types of things as part of a campaign. The broader campaign was called Stop Adani, and the organisation I was involved with was called Gully Blockade. And there's no doubt that we were, very passionate protesters and very peaceful protesters with regards to the coal mine they had planned and the impacts on the climate and the impacts on traditional owners and water and farmland, all that, the concerns associated with new coal developments. So, there's no doubt that we were very actively opposed to the mine. Judges obviously come to a perspective that Adani's allegations don't hold much weight, and she has struck many of them out, and which is, really great news for me. But it's more than that. It's great news for democracy in Australia, because I'm not the only one. It is a very big case, but there's, any number of individuals who are, peaceful protests with regards to environmental projects are being targeted by different companies. There's different police enforcement. It is a concern that democracy is curtailed when, citizens can't peacefully protest. So it's part of a broader, crackdown on, dissent around large fossil fuel projects, which, as we know, that we need dissent and concern about that because of the impacts they have on our, environment and traditional owners or villages. In India, there's any number of impacts, and there need to be, a healthy democracy helps society, determine whether those projects will go ahead or not. So it's been 4.5 years now. If Adani want to spend enough money, if they want to, be a bit more embarrassed their end, they can drag it out for quite a while still. My hope is that they don't. But we just don't know. They're not the most predictable company in the world, except they can predict they're really not going to care much about the average citizen. They were following me around, my wife around, including to her work as a psychologist. They were, following children around, including, me walking my 9-year-old girl to primary school. And these came up in court records. There was no reason that we would ever have to know. The reason that we found out that, Adani was following my children was because they put photos in evidence. So, whether they wanted us to know that, whether they wanted us to be scared, I'm not sure. But, they're the ones that involved my family. So far as I'm concerned, if I'm an active protester, which I have been, you've got to expect companies will try and get information on you. But they shouldn't be going after your family. Like, my wife has never been to a Stop Adani protest. My, kids are just kids and they're living their lives at primary school and high school and university. They don't deserve to be monitored by a multi-billion-dollar corporation that has got a very, very long, poor record with regards to how they treat people. And we've seen, what we predicted would happen has happened, is that Adani have taken, very favourable relationships with the Modi government that they've had. They've had, special economic zones set up for them. They've, had a bit of diplomatic power from the Modi government behind them, dealing with the government in Bangladesh as well as other places. And ultimately, it's the, the average everyday citizen who misses out, and Mr. Adani gets richer. We've been seeing that for a very long time now, is that all the money that, Gautam Adani has got, it didn't come from nowhere. It's come from people who could have had that money and used that money better, whether that's through cheaper power prices or with regards to the work they've done in airports or ports or whatever it may be. So, you don't get that rich without exploiting people. So that's what has happened. It's what we expected. We know that, we can't talk about it too much, but Mr. Adani now is facing various serious charges in the US with regards to corruption and bribery. And we will see how that plays over time. But it's been very ironic for people like myself and some of the traditional owners, and other passionate citizens here in Australia, is that, they call us criminals. But at the moment, it's Mr. Adani who's under, serious criminal charges.
Adani Mining has time till February 2025 to appeal the judgment and make fresh pleas. Whether it will do so or not remains to be seen.